Welcome back to this series on the World Domination Custom Cabinetry app. Today we're going to cover processes. So you see the processes menu item here in the menu structure. And again, we can unpin the menu by clicking on this closed sidebar. And then we have the whole screen to ourselves. In this particular application, it's not as important, so I can pin it back if I need to, and I may in a minute. I've got a job here, but I want to show you how this thing works and help you to reimagine operations manuals and standard operating procedures completely. So in the past, we've had to have a printed document that was placed in 3-ring binders or some sort of holding methodology throughout the plant for people to reference for rules, regulations, processes, how-tos, illustrations, all of those things. And they were plant or company specific, not project or room specific. And that's the beauty of Notion and one of its attributes above and beyond some of the other applications that are similar, in that you can have templates, and these templates can be project or room specific, and we're using them room specific. And a room may not be a single room, we're calling it rooms, but you may name 3 rooms in that and apply that because they all have the same finish, the same door style, the same profiles, same surface hardware. But anytime there's a variation in those things, it really should be separated out so that you can detail it out. And we covered that in earlier videos, so we're not going to go over that again, but we are going to go through this processes portion, and I want to try to give you some reasons to use this. So you're thinking of this rules and regulations and processes and step-by-step to-dos and all of those type things, but let's think about them room specific. So I've got a room here, and I've named it Buckley Test, and I've actually tied it to a room that we've done in earlier versions of this video series. And if we just scroll down through here, it doesn't look like much. So right now I have it open as a window. If I want to open it as a page, I can do that up here in the top left corner. Kind of utilize the whole page, especially if you have that menu area pinned. So this is the Buckley Test project that was created on March 5th of 2021, and it was created by me, and it is linked to a project or the rooms within a project called the Buckley Kitchen. So this is specific to the kitchen of this remodel project. And if there were 7 rooms, there would be 7 things unless they had the exact same selections. And so right now it's linked to the Buckley Kitchen. If we were to go to projects, we would see a Buckley project, and if we were to go to rooms, we would see Buckley Kitchen and maybe some other rooms, a master bath or something like that. And then we can assign this or claim it for ourselves. So the assignee doesn't necessarily mean we're assigning it to someone else. We're just saying, hey, it's me. So if we click on this, we see all the users that are in here. Now these are users from other apps that I'm doing, but I could assign it to myself, or I could pick someone else and say that you're responsible for this. And so if I assigned it to Wayne Burns, he would get a notification that you're responsible for these processes. And then you can put in a description. This is just a notes field. You could type anything you wanted into here. So if I scroll down through this real quick to the very bottom, you see it's not real long as far as the structure or the overall framework. We have in the order of the sequence of events we do. Now this first header kind of confuses that matter. This is the overview and sequence of events of things that happen in our shop, but the rest of these things are the sequence of events. So we would estimate a project kind of as step 1. Once we've met with somebody, then we would go out and field measure that. If they agreed to the pricing we had given them, then we might design the project, then we might engineer the project, and then receive our inventory for the materials we ordered during this. And you could separate this out and create a separate section for material acquisition. Just haven't done that at this point, but this is a template for you to work from. So if your material acquisition needs to be done by a separate person, you might separate that out. But part of these procedures would be to order the material as this is currently set up, and then receiving that inventory that you ordered, and then the machine procedures. And you see there's a lot of different items in here, and these are all just little roll-ups, we call them, because they will unroll when we click on this triangle. And then we have the assembly, so assembling the cabinets, and then finishing. And you may put your finishing above, depending on how you build your cabinets, face frame versus full access, and whether you finish frames separate from the cabinets, or all of the different variations in our methodologies. You may have finish above this, and it's as simple as clicking below or above and dragging over these, and then getting the 6 dots here and dragging this thing up, and as soon as you see the line above it, then it's above that. If I want it below it, I can just drag it below it. So there we go. That's how you would change those things. And then next we have the hardware procedures, and then delivery procedures, and then installation procedures. So again, we're back to, this is room specific. So let's kind of go back to the top and kind of work our way down through here. I don't want to make this a really long video, but I do want to at least touch on each of these things. So this would be something that somebody would probably only do once or twice, or maybe for the first month that they worked for you, because they know this overview and this sequence of events. But this is kind of telling them the names we use for things, especially if you abbreviate things. I'm not a big fan of abbreviations, but there's some things, especially when you start working with a printed cut list, or you have drawings and cabinets have maybe a SKU to identify that cabinet rather than a whole name. And people need to understand when you say you want an NLR what you're talking about. And so you'll see here as we read through here that they'll learn what our abbreviations are and all that. So this is our overview of our standard cabinet construction. You know, what is the cabinet made of? And then a base cabinet, what are the parts that make up that cabinet, and a wall cabinet and a tall cabinet, and then all the way down to the cabinet fillers and the names we use for those things. And then you could come down and say, what are the sequence of events for these things? So this is the overview, and then we would have a sequence of events. And again, they're not going to read this every time they do a room of cabinetry. They only need to do this until they understand it, and this is second nature to them. They've memorized it. It's not anything that's incredibly hard to memorize, and it's not something you memorize where you can state it back. It's just something you know the order of events. You know the sequence of events. You know that when you get hold of a base side left of a base cabinet, that if you're in a manual environment, you're going to cut that on a saw, you're going to groove it on some sort of saw. It doesn't get skid board, but it does get edge banded, and it has 2 stars next to it. So if we scroll down just a little bit to the bottom of this, we would see a note about those 2 stars. Here's partitions get line board with, so you can have all sorts of notes that are attributed to whatever your little asterisk points are or whatever. So you can have that. And then this part gets line board. Same thing with a base side right, but a base bottom gets cut and skid board and banded, and it doesn't get those other things. So somebody that's new to your system can figure out what has to happen to this stack of parts in a manual environment, and you would have a different sort of setup here for a CNC guy, and it's not as important in the CNC world to have this level of detail. So we're just going to kind of step down through here, and I'm going to unroll each one. Some of them are really long, some of them are not very long at all, so that you can kind of get a peek at what this is. But remember, this is specific to this Buckley room. We get a brand new, fresh one for every room we do. That's the reimagining this, that it's not a printed copy that you can't check off in some way. So in the areas that it's appropriate, we have check boxes. So as you start estimating a project, you open up the Custom Cabinet Estimator, and if you do that step, you check that step. Say, I'm done with that. If you get a phone call or somebody comes in and asks you a question, you know where you were when you go back to what you were doing. And we can do that in a lot of places. Now, some things you can't, like when you get down to the actual estimating the base cabinets. When we get done with all the base cabinets, we can check that off, but we wouldn't want to have this thing down to check boxes for every one of these steps. So we have some subgroupings of steps that we're going to cover this tab of base cabinets, get it done, check that, and then we're going to come down here and work on the upper cabinets till we get those done and check that. But you can make this as detailed and long as you want, or short as sweet as you want, but you need to have directions for new people coming in where your current employees are not constantly tied up training new people, and neither are accomplishing anything. The new guy doesn't know what to do, and the existing guy, the guy that is skilled and does know what he's doing, is constantly having to teach someone. Simple things should be able to be taught with procedures manual, operations manual, standard operating procedures, whatever you want to call these things. So you see that this is fairly detailed and fairly long about what all is required to go through and estimate a job and know that you've done it well. You can also embed things into this. So I've embedded the video. Now, somebody would watch this the very first time, and then they probably would never watch it again. But there's 3 videos here embedded of how to use the Custom Cabinet Estimator. And when we roll this back up, you don't even see any of this. You saw before when we rolled through here without it all unrolled that it's a very short, sweet list. But once you unroll it, it gets very long. So then we would field measure for the job, and we have detailed instructions about how to field measure the job. And some of those instructions require you to check this off. So it's also, when we look back, because it's room specific, we can look back and say, hey, you didn't do that. You didn't check that step. That's why we don't have this information or whatever that is. We have this breadcrumb trail when we're done as well, because it becomes job and room specific. So that's field measuring, and then double check the field measurements. That's something that we always did. Not everyone does that, but we field measured the job, came back and designed the job, and then took the drawings that were the result of that and went back and double checked the job. Not a lot of people do that, but we did, and we didn't make mistakes because we did that. And mistakes are expensive in a manufacturing process, especially if there's something in your process, something in your sequence of events is a constraint, a weakest link. So if your shop, the finish room is the constraint, and whatever you did wrong in involved finishing, then it's a very, very expensive mistake. So now we've got design procedures, and we see here this particular company would be using KCD, and so we have a roll down of here's what I want to do to design. These are kind of our rules. We want you to work in a clockwise or counterclockwise around the room. We don't want you just randomly drawing walls. Whatever those things are, you see we have some just detailed instructions. And then in KCD, there's an area that's kind of hidden called options, and we used those extensively within the True32 ecosystem, but we also used it within the Cabinetry system. So we want that reminder, did I need to do something with a tilt-out tray, or do I need to have some interiors that would default to finish that need to be raw, or vice versa? And do I need shelf holes where the shelf holes are there, the shelves are not? So the drawings reflect that they're shelves, but the owner does not want the shelves, or is going to use glass shelves, something like that. So whatever those options are, it's kind of a reminder to do that. Then we have the engineering procedures. So in this case, we're KCD users, so we're going to outsource our carcass parts to Cabinetry. So we want to go through this process of preparing to outsource those parts to Cabinetry, the engineering so that it'll be correct, drawn in the right library and all those things. And then we have the KCD CNC insourcing carcass parts. So if we're going to outsource them, we're going to do this. If we're going to insource them, we're going to do this. And then we have the Cabinetry when we get ready to, again, this is part of the engineering procedures, but this part might be moved to a secondary grouping called material acquisition. That's perfectly logical if you need two people to do it. As soon as you need two people doing that, that's when you would separate that. So we got this Cabinetry section, and here's the things we want to do and check and make sure we've done right, and we want to validate, and we want to request a quote, walk right through that, check them off, and we have that breadcrumb trail that someone did that. Then we want to order the doors and drawers from Conestoga, so we're going to use their Connex software. True32 and Cabinetry were linked to Connex and its predecessor OrderLink, and so these were the steps that we would go to utilize that process. So do the job portion first, then the rooms, then the doors themselves, and all the little check things that can go wrong if you're not paying attention. These are just friendly reminders, and you're checking it off that you read the reminder and that you did what it is you needed to do. All the way down through moldings. You know, things like this are really handy to be able to throw up an image in there. This portion of Connex where we have these specialty parts, and for us in the full access world, guys that are working in the full access world that want to order strips of wood that are used for toe kick, Connex is not real friendly to that process. There's only these species available to do that, but it doesn't preclude you from choosing something else, and so you just get these random errors if you don't choose one of these. So we just have this note, this reminder that when you do that, make sure you choose one of these species, not one of the other species. Just because your job is out of paint grade hard maple, you can't choose that here. You've got to choose one of these, that kind of thing. And you can have as many of these little reminders and notes as you want. You cut and paste. You can do this with your phone, in the field, in the shop. You could be editing your operations manual, and I'll show you when we get done here where you should do that. But we do want to keep this thing up to date, and you want to do that at the template level. So that'll be the last thing I cover here. And so then we've got our decorative items, and then we've got to validate, and then we've got our order. So decorative items being legs and feet and things like that. And then we want to validate the order, then we want to place the order, and then we want to talk about anything that drop shipped. So maybe we want to separate that. So that's a reminder for that. Then receiving inventory, you can have this as detailed as you want or simple as you want. You take the template and you edit this thing to make it what you want it to be. So there's all of the steps of receiving inventory, and you have the breadcrumb trail if they check the lists. And then machining procedures. How do you go about this? So this is kind of in that CNC shop as opposed to, and really it's both. You see here we have sliding table saw and the CNC procedures. So this first one is the CNC procedures. We've got lots of screenshots. I recommend that. I think you should be very, very detailed in these instructions so that people that are early in the learning process have this to refer back to. In time, they can ignore it, but until they can ignore it, they know it. Even here, we've got a tool information set. What tool goes in which location? What's the tool model when we need to or replace it? What are the feed rates? All of these things, and we have this reference. Where do we get the tools? What's the phone number, the place we buy them from? All of those type things should be in your operations manual. People shouldn't have to be searching for this information. And then go through these steps. So we've got all these in here and all these screenshots. I don't want to show you the actual step-by-step on this because it would be very time-consuming. It'd be a very long video, but you can see we've got lots of reference material and what the M codes are, all of those things, who to contact if the router's broke, who to contact if you got questions about the software, whatever. And so we got sliding table procedures, grooving procedures, and these things, if they need pictures, they will have pictures. If they don't need pictures, they'll just be short and sweet. Whatever needs to be there for that particular item is there, and up to you to what you add. Then we have assembly procedures. Now, I'm an advocate for lots of supporting documents for assembly procedures. We need to be able to use, people that have never built a cabinet before should be able to build a cabinet if you're working in the full access world, using this without somebody standing over their shoulder. And we get very detailed about here's where you're going to find the parts, and the parts are going to be segregated per cabinet, And when you get hold of this part, this is where the things go, and we're telling them step by step. Place the sides on the preparation table, one left, one right. The manual shops mark this for rails with a jig, and if you're not, you would have CNC specific holes so that you needed, but if you were a manual shop, you'd need a jig to say where all these things were. We detail out every one of these steps, which drawer guide to use if it's a Zargan, which drawer guide to use if it's an Nova Pro, depending on the cabinet depth, which one to use if it's an undermount slide, depending on the cabinet depth. All of this detail needs to be in here. And what are the model numbers for the hinge plates? And what are the model numbers for the drawer guide? If you're using Bloom versus Grass, and if you don't use either of those, you need to create a section with yours in here. But just literally step by step, lay this part down, then fold those up. Drive in your leg sockets, put this together this way, staple this or screw this or whatever you're going to do, depending on whatever your construction methods are. But you should have this level of detail for building cabinets in every single cabinet type. If you have a 3-drawer stack, you don't need a 4, 5, and 6-drawer stack. You've told them what they need to know. It's just a variation of that, but you do need to have all the various cabinet types in here. And we do, as a starter, as a primer of how to do that. And then we would have the same thing for the upper cabinets, and then we would have the same thing for the tall cabinets, and the same thing for face frame cabinets. And then the finish procedures, and the finish procedures should literally be distinguished between what the finish type is. So in this case, we're just distinguishing between stained and painted, but we have all the steps, and there will be things in here about how to mix the finishes and what percentages and all of that, and what to do for maintenance and when, daily, weekly, all of those things. Then you have your hardware procedures, and again, they should be very detailed, delivery procedures, and installation. This operations manual will serve as another purpose as well. On this installation, as we start going out and we say, okay, here's the layout, I'm going to do this, check these off, then I'm going to jump into doing my wall and tall cabinets first. We're telling them what order to do it in. So if they worked for someone else and they did the base cabinets first, and you prefer to do the wall cabinets first so that you're not climbing all over the base cabinets and they're not in the way of your ladder when you're doing your moldings, you're telling them the order you expect it to be in, literally step by step, and they're checking this off. So throughout the day, you can take your phone out of your pocket, even though they're out in the field installing, and see where they're at in that process of the installation process. That is awesome to be able to do that. And then they can come down through here and say, add some notes here to this and say, hey, I'm short the scribe mold, or I'm one piece of light rail. And the guys in the shop can see that. They can tag them and say, I'm going to need a piece of scribe mold tomorrow. I'm going to need a piece of crown mold tomorrow. I'm going to need a piece of light rail tomorrow. And they have time to get that ready for them for the next day, rather than at the end of the day, they come in and say, hey, by the way, we were short a piece of this and I need that. Well, you're not going to have it tomorrow because you just now told me, kind of thing. So really handy there. This is a super good methodology for setting your people up for success and creating an incredible manufacturing system that is profitable. So if we were to go back to this processes, we see here that we have 2 jobs, the Buckley test and this untitled. Well, here's where I started the untitled. So if I came in here and said this was a test job, and that it will not be because I'm going to tie it to a job, but if you did say this was a test job, then you would come down and say, what room is this specific to? So typically I don't type this if I'm not certain which room I'm going to grab, but if I know which room I'm going to grab, I go ahead and type that out, and I may not even type it until I do this part so that I know I want to say it the same way. I want to type it the same way. So this is the radius condo 17B. At that point, we've now made this particular template room specific. Now, how did I get here? And I'll show you that. So I'm going to jump out. So you would come here and say, I want a new process template. That's how you get to where I was. So you come in here and you click on that, and then you would give it a name. Now I'm going to delete it because I don't want to do that. If you clicked on this new, you still have that opportunity. So if I come into this new, then I can say I want this to be a new process template, and I get the exact same thing, but it's 2 clicks to get there, and it's fine either way you prefer it. You can come down there and do that, and this does take a minute sometimes depending on the time of day and how many people are using it and all of those things. So now you see we have several here that are untitled. Well, the other one I deleted it, so it took it a second to delete, but it was there, and now we can come in here and delete this one. One last thing on this processes section is we jumped in here and looked at this is the new processes template if we wanted to create a new template that was job specific. But one thing I didn't show you yet is if you come over here to this 3 dots, you see that it says edit this template. So if you click on those 3 dots, you have the opportunity to delete the template, duplicate the template, or edit the template. And all 3 of these are valid, but this is the one you'll use the most frequently. This one you'll use fairly frequently to be able to create variations of the template. So let's go to edit just so I can show you, and you see that it's exactly what we've been looking at, exact same thing that we've been looking at, but if we edit it here, then any of those edits will become permanent. So the next time we come here and say we want a new one, it will have those edits. So if you came into the overview section and added something new to it, or you came down to one of these sections maybe that had an image and you had changed something about how you did something, you replace that image, you would just scroll down to that section of it and delete the image that's there and add a new image. So that's how you actually edit the templates. And so as long as you're here, you're editing, and then when you click back, you're done editing. So that covers what I wanted to cover here in the processes. I really want you to think of this as a operations manual reimagined, room specific. Awesome way to manage your company, and I hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching.